Taiwan, baby.
Taiwan.
To this day.
To this day. To this day.
To this day.
We're covering today's top boxing news.
Okay, and now it's time for our weekend recap. You know, I have to say, in light of this weekend's fights and several others before it, I couldn't help but notice that there's been a valuable lesson in each one of these cards that have been coming out of the United Kingdom. And that lesson is the importance of the jab. That the jab in and of itself can be a determining factor in a contest. Whether you're talking about Dubois versus Joyce or Arthur versus Yard, in this case, Bakole versus Kuzmin, the jab is a determining factor. And in many of these cards and many of these fights, the jab really was the star of the show, and the jab determined the outcome.
It did.
I want to say that I really liked what I saw from Martin Bakole, his control over the match and its tempo by way of the lead hand. In truth, the only time Sergey Kuzmin was able to get anything done, close the gap and start letting off some shots, get into this fight, was when Martin Bakole wasn't jabbing. Though those instances in and of themselves were far and few. There were bursts of action deep in the pocket, mid-range to inside between Martin Bakole and Sergey Kuzmin, but overall, the aesthetic of this match was Martin Bakole exhibiting a lot of control by way of the lead hand. I mean, perhaps you could argue that Sergey Kuzmin was throwing heavier leather, power shots, mid-range to inside, but overall he didn't get that many opportunities to do that, and that was because of Martin Bakole's jab. Congratulations to him. He took to calling out Michael Hunter for what could be a rematch, and you know what? I'm not against that. I wouldn't mind seeing Martin Bakole try to avenge the loss to Michael Hunter in his very next fight, although I will say, wouldn't mind seeing Martin Bakole lock horns with Hughie Fury. Hughie Fury, who surprised me with his performance against Mariusz Wach. You know, on the surface of it, you don't figure that the fight is going to be as scrappy as it was, but these guys really were throwing leather. Credit to Hughie Fury for being as active and as engaging as he was against Mariusz Wach, battling through adversity. A cut over his left eye that was caused by a clash of heads between him and Mariusz Wach, and all things considered, it really didn't take away anything from Hughie Fury's performance. It didn't really seem to bother him. I want to say that Mariusz Wach tried to get off to a strong start in the first round, but very quickly we saw Hughie Fury assert himself, and he showed some virtues. I mean, he really did. He showed a bit of switch hitting. He showed a bit of activity. He actually let some right hands go, where Hughie Fury has been the butt of some jokes in some circles for not letting that right hand go enough. He did so several times throughout the course of this match. He was, in fact, the busier fighter out of the two fighters in the fight. Showed some movement, showed some ambidextrous switch hitting, showed a good chin. As I can recall at least 2 or 3 instances throughout the course of this match where Hughie Fury was on the receiving end of some heavy leather from Mariusz Wach. I saw Mariusz get a good right hand in there. I saw Mariusz get a good uppercut in there. And Hughie Fury absorbed those shots and kept on working, kept on fighting. I really got to take my hat off to Hughie Fury for this performance. I really like what I saw from him. It was much better than what we saw in the Pulev fight, the Parker fight, or the Povetkin fight.
Looks like he's improved.
He really looked a man alive, and I wouldn't be at all averse to seeing a fight between Hughie Fury and Martin Bakole, provided that Martin can't get that Michael Hunter rematch. We then come to the Okolie versus Jezewski fight. Jezewski, who ended up standing in for Krzysztof Glowacki, and you know, this is yet another fight where the lead hand really was the star of the show. I've often said that Lawrence Okolie, given his dimensions, if he could develop into a jabber, more of a jabber, use that wingspan, use that height, use that athleticism,
Coordinate.
to set his shots up behind a stiff stick, Lawrence Okolie could become quite formidable. And very early in this fight, which didn't last all that long, you saw the difference. You saw Lawrence Okolie employing a very effective jab, firing that jab as opposed to just pawing with the lead hand. He used it to set up shots. The right hand to the body off the jab.
That was the beginning of the end for Jezewski.
And Lawrence Okolie, essentially what you're talking about is a guy with such generous dimensions for a cruiserweight that he could easily move up into and fill out at heavyweight. If a fighter with these kinds of dimensions, a long, rangy guy, can develop a stiff stick, a good jab, that's a fighter who can really go places, and I think that's what we saw in this fight. I think that was the difference. We saw Lawrence Okolie setting up more shots off the jab as opposed to needlessly fighting on the inside, giving up his height, giving up his reach, and, diving into a clinch. I was worried that this fight would be anticlimactic given some of Lawrence Okolie's tendencies, what we've seen from him in the past, but this was quite the opposite, and I'm very impressed with him.
I was very impressed with Jezewski's chicken dance.
Credit to Jezewski for trying to fight on when he was so obviously hurt by Lawrence Okolie's right hand, and I've talked about Lawrence Okolie's right hand, that he seems to have dynamite in it whenever he can get it off.
A lot of times he smothers his own work.
And I actually had Lawrence Okolie winning that Krzysztof Glowacki fight. I figured that the aesthetic of the match was likely going to be hard to watch the way many of Lawrence Okolie's fights have been, but at some point he's going to give himself enough room to let a right hand go, and I didn't trust that Krzysztof Glowacki would be able to take it. So I actually had Lawrence winning that fight. This version of Lawrence makes me that much more confident that he can and will win that WBO title when that Glowacki fight is rescheduled. It's really always been my hang-up with Lawrence Okolie, that if you have those kinds of physical dimensions, those kinds of physical attributes, you need to use them. Don't just paw with your lead hand. It's that much easier to work around when you leave it out there. But if the lead hand is coming in hard and it's coming in fast from a guy with the kind of wingspan that Lawrence has, well, that can create a very difficult situation for a lot of fighters who might need to close the gap on someone as statuesque as Lawrence.
And it appears he got the memo.
Likewise, I very much like what I saw here. I very much like Lawrence's employment of the lead hand. Credit to him, and congratulations for adding another win to his professional record. We then come to the main event of that same card, the heavyweight title fight between Anthony Joshua, the unified champion, and Kubrat Pulev, the mandatory challenger. And this fight had more or less the kind of aesthetic that I was expecting. It went on a little longer than I thought it would. Credit to Kubrat Pulev for hanging on and hanging in there past the 6th round. I really didn't think this fight would go into the 9th.
He took a lot of hard shots.
In the build-up of this fight, I talked about the importance of the jab and how for Kubrat Pulev, oftentimes, that's his most effective weapon. But that weapon would be taken away by the more statuesque and able-bodied Anthony Joshua, who's a bit of a jabber himself.
We saw that almost immediately.
That Anthony Joshua really was going to town, upstairs and downstairs, on Kubrat Pulev with the lead hand, effectively controlling the distance and controlling the pace of the fight. That Kubrat Pulev simply can't get in there, close the gap to do any kind of business, because the ever-present lead hand of Anthony Joshua is serving as a deterrent to greet him at the door before he gets to cross into it. I really am surprised that Kubrat Pulev was able to endure as much punishment as he endured. I think he was dropped, 3-4 times throughout the course of this fight? He ate jabs, he ate right hands, he ate uppercuts.
Yeah, Anthony really laid into this guy.
I think the best way to describe Anthony Joshua's performance in this fight is the search for that happy medium between being a boxer and being a puncher. The two base styles, the safety first hit and not get hit, defensively minded, pure boxer, and the
puncher,
educated punching and educated aggression of the boxer puncher that sets up his shots, but he very much is going for the knockout. Anthony Joshua's style is somewhere in between there, and I think that's what we saw in this Kubrat Pulev
title fight
defense. Post-fight, Teddy Atlas took to Twitter, and in so many words, he stated that the ghosts of the Andy Ruiz Jr. fight still live in the recesses of Anthony Joshua's mind. They're still in there somewhere. That trauma that he suffered at the hands of that guy. And, I have to agree to some extent. There did seem to be a bit of hesitation from Anthony Joshua whenever he was mid-range to inside of Kubrat Pulev, though I choose to look at that as a glass half full kind of situation. I choose to look at that as a lesson learned. A lesson he learned in the first Andy Ruiz fight. That if you're ever in the pocket with a smaller fighter, it favors the smaller fighter with the shorter arms, the shorter wingspan, and the lower center of gravity. So rather than trading punches with that smaller fighter in the pocket, you're better off just diving into a clinch.
Don't let the little guy get in the fight.
Because at that range, that's what that smaller fighter might do. I think this hesitation at that distance in the pocket, I think that hesitation effectively characterizes these proverbial ghosts that Teddy Atlas was talking about. But I choose to look at that as a positive. I choose to look at that as a lesson learned, that it really is unwise to trade punches with a smaller fighter that has a lower center of gravity, shorter arms, mid-range to inside. And for Anthony Joshua, experience really was the best teacher. So perhaps there was some hesitation at that range, at that distance, deep in the pocket.
That doesn't have to be a bad thing.
Because, all in all, Anthony Joshua basically pitched a shutout against Kuzmin Pulev. At no moment in this fight was Kuzmin in control of anything. He was just hanging on, hanging in there, and trying to survive. And in hindsight, it's not like Anthony Joshua went in there and fought a safety-first kind of fight. There were controlled bursts of aggression as Anthony Joshua's money punch, his trademark uppercuts, made several appearances throughout the course of this fight. And that was mid-range to inside. So it's not like he was completely cautious there.
Completely afraid to let his hands go.
I'll say that the aesthetic of the match was a little more controlled than what I expected. I expected a smidge more aggression from Anthony Joshua, but you really can't nitpick this performance, because I reiterate, not only did he pitch a shutout, but he dropped this guy about, 3-4 times?
What more did you want him to do? You wanted him to take the guy's head clean off his shoulders?
This was a systematic beating, a systematic one-sided beating of Kuzmin Pulev, and perhaps it's a blessing in disguise that the fight lasted about 9 rounds as opposed to the 6 or under 6 rounds that I was expecting. You got to remember, before this fight, Anthony Joshua hadn't seen any action in about 12 months. So perhaps it's a blessing in disguise that he got to get some rounds in with a world-level contender, and he took minimal punishment in the process of doing so. Because the story seems to be that on Monday, people over there at Top Rank are going to see about making that Tyson Fury versus Anthony Joshua fight. And that news is from the Bobfather himself, who post-fight quickly took to Twitter to let everybody know they're going to start working on this thing. I must admit that I maintain a certain level of skepticism as to whether or not Joshua versus Fury will be the very next fight that takes place. And it's because of the aforementioned reasons I've specified in previous videos that, okay, Joshua just had a fight in December, but if Tyson Fury's very next fight is the Anthony Joshua fight, that guy will have been out of action for 12 months. And I'm not convinced that Tyson Fury's going to walk into the undisputed heavyweight title fight having not fought in the last 12 months. The night of that fight. Just as well, very cryptic tweet from the WBO's president, Paco Veracel.
It's trouble in paradise.
I hate to say this, but it sounds a lot like the WBO plan on standing in the way of the undisputed heavyweight title fight, per a tweet from Paco Veracel that reads, Anthony Joshua looked sensational against Kuzmin Pulev. As to the World Boxing Organization belt, Eddie Hearn knows the meaning of commitment. The ball is in Hearn's court. And he tagged Alexander Usyk, he tagged Alexander Krassyuk, he tagged Egis Klimas, Tyson Fury, Dan Rafael, Boxing Scene, Steve Kim, Pug Boxing, and Jake in the Box. I mean, essentially, he's letting these guys know that Anthony Joshua is due to satisfy their mandatory challenger, and it seems like they have every intention of enforcing that mandatory upon him.
So don't go getting too excited
Perhaps
just yet.
we are getting ahead of ourselves with all this enthusiasm towards what could be an Anthony Joshua versus Tyson Fury fight, as there are enough hurdles, enough obstacles to get over before it comes to that. And this is boxing. The news is fluid and ever-changing. There's no guarantees that that's going to be the very next fight we see both of those fighters in. Our alternatives, other scenarios, other circumstances that could take place before it comes to that. That being said, we still have this performance to rate, this performance to react to. I'd have to say that, given what I saw from Anthony Joshua against Kuzmin Pulev, if I had to put a grade on it, perhaps a solid B or B+. Though even that does seem like nitpicking. I mean, we are essentially talking about a performance, a fight, where Anthony Joshua effectively pitched a shutout, hurt the guy, dropped him 4 times, and was never in any kind of trouble himself. Post-fight, saw a lot of mixed reactions, mixed reviews to this performance, and I just don't know how much more people were expecting from Anthony Joshua. It really does seem like he's held to a different standard than most anyone and everyone else. Look at it this way. If this fight was a prelude to something bigger, if this performance from Anthony Joshua was a segue to a Tyson Fury fight, consider what Tyson Fury's segue was to that Wilder rematch. The Otto Wallin fight, the one where he was cut, the one where you had to deal with adversity, the one where the unheralded contender actually made him work for it.
But nobody expected him to.
In hindsight, for Tyson Fury, it all worked out for the best, didn't it? I mean, he still went on to beat Deontay Wilder from pillar to post, having been in a very physical fight, a very arduous fight, the fight right before that. Whereas here, Anthony Joshua didn't have to languish with his opponent the way that Tyson Fury did with Otto Wallin. So how critical are we supposed to be of Anthony Joshua and how he looked against Kubrat Pulev when not only is Kubrat a more highly ranked contender than Otto Wallin was when Tyson Fury fought him, but unlike Tyson Fury, Joshua didn't struggle. He dominated this guy from the opening bell
To the 9th round where he stopped him.
Yet I did see a lot of mixed reviews post-fight after this performance. Myself, I can't objectively nitpick what I saw from Anthony Joshua in this fight. There's not much there to actually critique.
There isn't.
He didn't finish the guy as fast as I thought he would, and he didn't come out as aggressive, quite as aggressive as I thought he would, but all the same, this is a fight that never got away from him. On the face of it, what is it that Anthony Joshua didn't show that his critics wanted to see? You tell me. He showed the jab, effective usage of the jab. He showed the right hand, big right hand. He finished Kubrat Pulev with a big right hand. He showed his money punch. He showed the uppercut.
Several times.
He showed bursts of aggression. He showed combination punching. He showed good management of distance and spacing. He showed poise. He showed composure, I'd say.
You wouldn't?
And in spite of a bit of hesitation mid-range to inside, I reiterate, the best way to look at that is as a lesson learned from the Ruiz fight, that if you're in there with a fighter that's got shorter arms and a lower center of gravity, don't trade with him in the pocket.
You're better off smothering his work than doing that.
The whole situation reads to me like one of those situations to where the individual has already made up their mind, and there's just nothing that the fighter can do right for that individual. Because I reiterate, maybe it took a little longer than I expected for Anthony Joshua to take this guy out, but he did take the guy out. He did hurt the guy several times in the fight, and he basically pitched a shutout. So there's just really not much to critique here.
And this was off a 12-month layoff.
I don't think that this is the kind of victory that you shout from the rooftops about. I don't read that much into it, but I do think it's the kind of victory to where there's not much there to critique. There's not much there to be upset about. What the hell else did you want the guy to do to Kubrat Pulev?
Fuck if I know.